Have you ever found yourself just nodding along to a conversation? Maybe you're at a crowded dinner party or, I don't know, right in the middle of a really high-stakes meeting, and your brain is just entirely, absolutely out to lunch.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Right, like you're making all the appropriate eye contact, you're doing the little, wow sounds at exactly the right intervals, but behind your eyes, it's just a monkey clashing cymbals together.
It's just static.
Exactly, static. And then suddenly, the ambient noise shifts. The other person stops talking, and they just look at you expectantly.
And your stomach just drops.
Yes, you get
Yeah.
that cold drop in your stomach because you realize you haven't actually processed a single syllable they've uttered for, like, the last 5 minutes.
It's a universally terrifying moment, honestly. It's the conversational equivalent of stepping down in the dark and expecting a stare that just isn't there.
Oh, that's a perfect way to describe it.
Right, your foot just drops through empty space, and you realize the whole illusion of your attention has completely shattered. You're completely untethered from the interaction, just scrambling for any context clue before they figure out you've been mentally completely absent.
It is the absolute worst feeling.
Yeah.
And, it happens to all of us. But pulling that apart, really understanding why that disconnect happens and how to permanently fix it is exactly what we are going to do today.
Yeah, and we're pulling our insights from a pretty unexpected toolkit today.
We really are. So today's source material is this highly detailed, incredibly granular manual. It's originally titled How to Teach Listening, and it was designed specifically for ESL educators, so people who teach English as a second language.
Which I know might initially sound like a really hyper-specific, maybe dry academic text, but the underlying mission of our deep dive today is incredibly broad.
Definitely.
Because while the authors of this manual wrote it to help language teachers train students to decode English, the psychological insights, the tactical ear training games, the structural secrets, they're totally universal.
Right. We're essentially extracting those tools to help you, the listener, become a master of active listening in your own daily life.
Exactly, because the mechanics apply equally, whether you're, trying to acquire a new language, prepping for a job interview, or just trying to decode the passive-aggressive undertones of your office politics.
Or even just trying to decipher the underlying cultural message of a pop song on your commute. Okay, so let's unpack this. Because the foundational premise that this text establishes right out of the gate is that listening is heavily, maybe fatally misunderstood by the general public.
We treat it like a biological reflex.
Exactly. We treat it as this totally passive exercise. Like you sit there, you possess a pair of functional ears, sound waves travel through the air, vibrate your eardrums, and boom, you're listening. We treat it like digestion.
Right, you swallow the food and your body just does the rest automatically.
Yes, but the core thesis we're exploring today is that there is absolutely nothing passive about it. Listening is an incredibly active, highly trainable, and dangerously sharp skill.
It really is. We completely confuse hearing with listening because, hearing is biological, but listening is this complex, cognitive, almost athletic endeavor.
Athletic is a great word for it.
Yeah, and we don't realize how athletic it is until we look at the invisible architecture of speech. When you actually break down how humans communicate verbally, you start to realize why true listening requires so much caloric energy.
It's exhausting.
It is. The text actually opens by demystifying what it calls the 3 secrets to successful listening comprehension. And it points out that native speakers of any language rely on this really dense, invisible web of oral clues.
And we use them completely unconsciously.
Exactly. But this hidden architecture makes decoding speech incredibly complex for the brain to process in real time.
I want to dive right into that first secret they identify, which is word stress. The premise here is that speakers naturally emphasize the most important words in a sentence.
Right. They do it through a combination of more careful pronunciation, raising their pitch, maybe increasing their volume slightly.
And the text gives this example that completely shifted my perspective because it's so incredibly subtle, but it changes the entire reality of the conversation. It's the difference between the phrases, I can help you and I can't help you.
That example is just the perfect distillation of how fragile verbal communication really is.
It really is.
Because if you look at those 2 sentences written down on a piece of paper, grammatically, they are nearly identical. But a native speaker does not say them identically with just a tiny tin sound tacked onto the end of the latter.
Right.
In the negative version, that negative modal, the can't, contains the most vital data in the entire sentence. It dictates whether you're getting assistance or whether you are totally on your own.
So what does the brain do?
Well, to flag that vital data, the brain unconsciously stresses it. The speaker will naturally elongate the vowel, they'll raise their vocal pitch by a fraction, and they'll speak that specific word just a little bit louder, so it's, I can't help you.
Wait, let me just stop you there, because the text uses that term modal quite a bit. And for someone who hasn't been in a grammar class in, 20 years, what exactly is a modal in this context, and why is it so prone to this kind of stress?
Oh, that's a really crucial clarification. So a modal verb is essentially a helper verb. It's a word like can, could, should, would, might, must.
Okay.
By themselves, they don't really show action. Instead, they express the condition of the action, things like possibility, permission, obligation. They're basically the flavor of the
So
sentence.
like, I go to the store versus I must go to the store.
Exactly. I go is a simple fact. I must go implies an urgent obligation. And because these tiny helper words carry such massive contextual weight, native speakers just naturally manipulate them with stress to ensure the listener grasps the condition of the reality being described.
Which means if a listener's ear isn't trained to catch that invisible spike in pitch or volume, they might walk away from the interaction completely misinterpreting the outcome.
But-
And the text highlights that this exact same invisible stress happens with phrasal verbs too, right? Like those two-part verbs like turn off or give up.
Yes.
Native speakers habitually throw all the stress onto the final word of the phrase. So if you're like a language learner or just someone trying to parse a fast-talking manager in a really noisy room, and you don't know to actively listen for that specific stress syllable, the entire directive is just lost in the wind.
Exactly. And that actually brings us to the compounding difficulty of the second secret, which is reductions.
Oh, yeah.
This is the phenomenon where natural fluid speech essentially blurs syllables together into this continuous stream of sound. So I could have gone devolves into I could have gone, or do you want to becomes dia wanna.
Which brings up a really fascinating mechanism because the manual talks about things like assimilation and elision. And I really want to understand the mechanics here. Like, why do our brains take these perfectly good, distinct words and just turn them into a phonetic mush?
It really all comes down to cognitive economy and biomechanics.
Meaning we're just lazy.
Basically, yes. The human brain is an incredibly efficient engine, and it is constantly seeking ways to expend the least amount of energy possible while still achieving its goal.
Right.
Articulating every single consonant and vowel perfectly requires significant muscular effort from your jaw, your tongue, your lips, plus breath control. So in the natural rhythm of a language, we find shortcuts.
Like assimilation.
Right. Assimilation happens when neighboring sounds blend together to make pronunciation physically easier. Think about the word handbag.
Handbag, right.
If you say it quickly in a sentence, your mouth doesn't want to stop to form the hard D, and B sounds separately. It assimilates them, and it comes out sounding like handbag.
Handbag. Yeah, that makes total sense. It's literally just your mouth taking the path of least physical resistance.
Exactly. And then you have elision, which is when sounds or entirely whole syllables just vanish completely because they aren't strictly necessary for the rhythmic flow.
Okay, give me an example.
Like the word comfortable. We rarely pronounce it comfortable. It gets elided into comfortable.
Comfortable, yeah.
We blur and drop these words because it is faster and more calorically efficient for the speaker. But here is the catch. That efficiency for the speaker creates a massive cognitive burden for the listener. The listener must have a highly trained ear to instantly translate that blurred, elided mush back into grammatically correct word combinations in order to comprehend the meaning.
I love how you phrase that because it reminds me of an analogy. Trying to process this is like trying to read a book where all the punctuation is completely invisible and the spaces between the words keep changing based on how much of a hurry the author was in.
That is a perfect analogy.
You have no commas, no periods, just this continuous slurred string of letters. And your brain has to aggressively guess where one thought ends and another begins. And that leads us seamlessly into the third secret the text explores, which is sentence intonation.
Right.
This is the reality that the physical pitch of our voice changes the literal meaning of the vocabulary.
Intonation does so much more than just make a language sound melodious or pleasant. It is a really critical data delivery system. Take a basic grammatical structure, like a statement. You are studying English.
Okay.
If the speaker uses a rising intonation at the end of that sentence, letting their pitch slide upward on the word English, that rising pitch magically overrides the grammar and turns a statement into a question.
Right. You are studying English.
Exactly. And the same applies to single, isolated words. Imagine holding up two vegetables at the grocery store. Tomatoes. cucumbers. The rising intonation signals to the other person that a choice or a response is required.
Whereas a falling intonation means something else entirely.
Right. Conversely, if you place a heavy stress at the beginning of a statement followed by a sharp, falling intonation, it signals an imperative command. The vocabulary alone doesn't dictate how you should react. The melody of the words dictates the reaction.
Which brings me to something I explicitly wanted to challenge you on, because the text dedicates space to this, and I found it fascinating. What about sarcasm?
Oh, sarcasm.
Right, because based on everything we've just discussed about how pitch and stress convey truth, sarcasm seems like it's the ultimate subversion of this entire architecture.
It really is.
Like, to recognize sarcasm, you have to realize that the inflection and intonation the person is using are the exact opposite of what they grammatically should be.
That is a brilliant way to frame it. Sarcasm is essentially conversational espionage.
Conversational espionage, I love it.
It relies entirely on deliberately violating the invisible architecture we just mapped out. As the text explains, a rising intonation on a stressed word where you would normally expect a falling intonation to indicate finality, or a completely deadpan, monotone delivery of highly emotional vocabulary, signals to the listener that the speaker means the exact inverse of the literal words leaving their mouth.
Which is precisely why sarcasm almost never translates in written text without the aid of, emojis or explicit context.
Exactly. In speech, if your ear misses that deliberately reversed oral clue, you don't just miss a nuance, you absorb the complete opposite of the intended message.
So if we take this out of the ESL classroom and connect it to your daily life, even if you're listening to someone speak your native tongue, how often do massive miscommunications in romantic relationships or like bitter conflicts in the workplace stem not from the actual vocabulary that was used, but from a total misread of this invisible oral architecture?
All the time.
Right. You sit in a meeting, you think your boss is making a definitive statement about a project's failure, but they actually used a rising intonation and were asking for your creative input.
Yep.
Or your partner says they are fine with a perfectly monotone delivery, and you take the vocabulary literally instead of recognizing the oral subversion of sarcasm.
It happens constantly, and it is the root of so much unnecessary interpersonal friction. We operate under this false assumption that because we registered the vocabulary, we received the communication.
But we only got half the message.
At best. Without actively decoding the stress, untangling the reductions, and interpreting the intonation, you're missing the core data.
Knowing how complex this underlying architecture really is, it's honestly no wonder our brains sometimes just throw up a white flag and short circuit. Like, it's neurologically exhausting.
It is.
And that realization transitions us perfectly into the next major concept in the manual, which outlines what we can call the fatal flaws of a listener.
Right.
The text lists these specific identifiable habits that actively sabotage our comprehension. And I will confess, reading through this list, I realized I am guilty of almost every single one of them.
Well, don't feel too bad. The manual categorizes these as typical ESL listening mistakes, but realistically, they are universal human behaviors. They emerge whenever we are forced to process difficult, dense, or emotionally fraught auditory information.
Okay, so what's the first one?
The very first flaw they identify is giving in to mental block.
Oh, yeah.
This happens when the act of listening demands a massive spike in effort, whether you are trying to understand a heavy foreign accent or you're sitting through a deeply complex, jargon-heavy technical presentation. The brain just hits a cognitive wall. And instead of intervening, asking for clarification, asking the speaker to slow down, or requesting they rephrase the concept, the listener simply decides the effort is too high, tunes out the audio stream, and gives up entirely.
Okay, so I actually have to push back on this being labeled a flaw.
Oh.
Yeah, is giving in to a mental block really a failure of listening? Or is it just the brain's natural, necessary defense mechanism against severe cognitive overload? Because if I am at a highly technical engineering pitch, and someone is blasting me in the face with a fire hose of specialized data that I don't have the foundational knowledge to process, stepping out of the stream seems like a highly rational survival instinct. My brain is saving its RAM so it doesn't crash.
You are absolutely right that it originates as a protective mechanism. The brain is trying to prevent cognitive fatigue.
Right.
But in the context of active listening, it's classified as a flaw because it is a passive surrender that stops the transfer of knowledge dead in its tracks. You are confusing hearing preservation with active communication.
Oh, okay, I see.
The manual stresses that a master listener must be trained to lose the social fear of interrupting, to ask for repetition or translation. The assumption we make is that stopping someone to say, I didn't understand that, makes us look foolish.
We all hate looking dumb in meetings.
Exactly. But the reality is that native speakers or subject matter experts are overwhelmingly willing to help and rephrase if they know you are genuinely trying to grasp their point. Tuning out is the path of least resistance. Actively negotiating the meaning by asking for clarity is the muscular work of true listening.
I see the distinction. It's the difference between abandoning the puzzle entirely and just asking for a different angle to solve it.
Precisely. Which brings us to the second major flaw the text highlights, which is translating in your head.
This one is huge.
It is a particularly nasty cognitive habit. It's where a listener hears a phrase, internally pauses the incoming audio stream, translates the phrase into their native tongue or into concepts they are more comfortable with, and then formulates a reply.
It's the human equivalent of buffering.
Exactly. And the manual points out that this absolutely destroys conversational fluency because it creates a massive latency issue. If we look at the neurobiology of why this fails, it's because it is computationally devastating for the brain to maintain.
Because you're doing too many things at once.
Right. You are trying to hold the new audio in your short-term memory, process the translation, and monitor the ongoing conversation all at once.
That's impossible.
Well, the text notes that simultaneous interpretation, what you see at the United Nations, for example, is a highly specialized skill that requires years of intense, grueling practice to achieve without cognitive failure.
Wow.
A standard learner or everyday listener shouldn't expect their brain to act as a seamless middleman. You have to train yourself to bypass the translation phase and attempt to think directly in the language or terminology you're receiving.
Because if you don't, it's like trying to watch a complex thriller movie while simultaneously rewriting the script in a different font in your head. You are guaranteed to miss the actual plot happening on the screen.
Perfect analogy.
Which leads us to the third flaw, which the text calls being too ambitious. This is the classic scenario of biting off vastly more than you can cognitively chew.
Right.
The manual gives a highly specific, almost tragic example of a beginner English student who decides to test their skills by buying a movie where the protagonists are gangsta rappers featuring incredibly dense slang, rapid-fire delivery, and heavy regional accents.
Yeah, that's rough.
The student watches it, understands absolutely nothing, and ends up feeling completely deflated and wanting to quit the language altogether.
It is a perfect example of a self-inflicted defeat. The listener failed to recognize the limits of their current cognitive scaffolding. They jumped into the deep end of the ocean before learning how to tread water.
So what's the fix?
The manual suggests that a crucial strategy for listening is the staged approach. You don't start with the most complex, unvarnished audio available. You start with subtitles. You break the audio down into small, digestible 3-minute chunks.
Keep it manageable.
Exactly. A short, highly focused listening exercise where you actually extract meaning is vastly superior to a punishing 2-hour session where you're hopelessly adrift. Calibrating your ambition to your current skill level prevents that paralyzing mental block we discussed earlier.
That calibration is so key. And it ties directly into the fourth flaw they identify, which is doing other things. This is essentially the myth of multitasking.
Right.
The manual describes students who try to transcribe every single word a teacher says during a lecture, or who frantically flip through a dictionary in the middle of a live conversation trying to define a single unknown word.
This specific flaw really forces us to confront the fundamental difference between hearing vocabulary and comprehending meaning.
Yes.
Because if your prefrontal cortex is entirely hijacked by the mechanical act of writing down exact phrasing or the panic of hunting for a dictionary definition, you have zero processing power left to track the overarching gist of the dialogue.
You lose the forest for the trees.
Exactly. The text emphasizes a hard truth. It is almost never necessary to understand every single word to understand the complete message.
Which provides the perfect runway to the final flaw on their list, which is not using the right strategies.
Yeah.
The manual points out that listeners often fail because they don't apply the right cognitive filter for the specific task at hand.
Yep.
They provide an amazing, highly practical example about asking for directions. Let's say you are lost, and you ask a local how to find the central library. If your strategy is to try and memorize every single preposition, adjective, and filler word they use in their response, you are going to fail.
It's too much data.
Way too much. The correct strategy is highly targeted. You listen exclusively for the gist, you extract the vital directional keywords left, right, north, street, clock tower, and then you immediately check for comprehension by repeating just those main data points back to them.
That is the very definition of strategic active listening. You are deploying a specific cognitive tool tailored to a specific environmental demand. You aren't just absorbing sound, you're hunting for context, extracting the structural data points and verifying them in real time.
So we've mapped out the pitfalls. We know that we shouldn't tune out when it gets hard, we shouldn't try to be a simultaneous interpreter in our own heads, and we shouldn't sacrifice the overarching meaning to hunt down a single piece of vocabulary.
Right.
The obvious question for you, the listener, is how do we actively build the right habits?
Uh-huh.
How do we break out of what I like to think of as our safe, sanitized listening bubbles?
Well, the manual dedicates a brilliant, highly structured section to answering exactly that. It begins by highlighting a massive, often unspoken gap in how we train people to listen.
Okay, what is the gap?
There is a total chasm between the fabricated, sanitized audio materials used in classrooms or, corporate training modules, and the messy, chaotic reality of authentic human speech.
Oh, absolutely.
When instructional materials are deliberately engineered to be easy to comprehend, they systematically strip away the exact acoustic elements that define real-world communication.
The manual actually lists the specific components that this fake audio lacks, and it's a fascinating checklist of reality. First, it lacks realistic intonation. Classroom audio often exaggerates pitch in a way that feels incredibly patronizing or irritating to an adult listener.
It sounds so unnatural.
It really does.
Yeah.
Second, it operates at a steady, robotic, unvarying speed, completely devoid of the natural accelerations and pauses a real human uses when they're thinking on their feet.
Right.
Third, it completely lacks the assimilation and elision, that slurring and blurring of sounds that we explored earlier. In fake audio, every character speaks in perfectly complete, rigidly grammatical sentences. But the element that stood out to me the most is that fabricated audio lacks interrupted turn-taking.
That is perhaps the most critical missing piece, because think about how a fabricated dialogue operates. Person A speaks their complete thought,
Silence.
then person B speaks their complete thought.
Which never happens in real life.
Never. That is not how human beings interact. In authentic life, native speakers are constantly anticipating the end of a sentence, interrupting, talking over one another, interjecting agreements, and weaving their thoughts into this single chaotic tapestry.
And background noise, right?
Yes. Furthermore, fabricated audio is almost always recorded in a vacuum. Real life does not take place inside a soundproof recording booth. There is ambient noise, sirens, other conversations, echoes.
Yeah, life is loud.
Exactly. If you only ever train your ear in a sterile, isolated environment, the sheer sensory chaos of the real world will completely overwhelm your processing capabilities.
So the manual actually provides a fascinating roadmap for transitioning out of that sterile environment. It maps out a progression of authentic sources designed to help a listener incrementally level up their ear. It's literally a continuum of complexity.
I love this part.
It starts at level 1, which involves listening to guest speakers or other teachers. The text astutely notes that any time a person knows they are speaking to a non-native speaker or a novice in their field, they will naturally and unconsciously slow down their cadence and over-articulate their words.
Right, so it is an excellent first step out of the textbook, but it is still a modified, curated version of reality.
Exactly. From there, the continuum moves to level 2, TV commercials. These are fantastic training tools because they feature incredibly clear, professional speech, but they are driven by a fast-paced script and, most importantly, they offer massive visual context.
Your eyes are helping your ears guess what is happening.
Yes. Then level 3 strips away some of that visual crutch with weather reports. You still have a map, but the vocabulary becomes highly specialized and repetitive.
Right.
By level 4, the visuals are removed entirely. This is the realm of radio broadcasts and audiobooks. Now, your brain is relying solely on auditory input to paint the picture, and you're introduced to a wider variety of regional accents, though the pronunciation remains pretty careful and deliberate.
And then we reach level 5. And this is where the manual takes a turn that I absolutely love. It points to YouTube videos featuring real, unscripted, everyday people.
Oh, this is wild.
Right. It gives this incredibly vivid, specific example of a video where a guy named Cousin Jake is explaining to the camera how he modified the motor on his ATV.
It's such a wonderfully chaotic example, because Cousin Jake is not a trained voice actor delivering a polished line in a studio.
Not at all.
He is a real human being with a thick, heavy accent. He uses highly colloquial, probably ungrammatical speech patterns. He speaks at a rapid, uneven rate. And crucially, there is environmental noise, the sound of tools clanking and engine revving, wind hitting the microphone. It is a dense, difficult, deeply unvarnished oral environment.
It really is.
But I have to play devil's advocate here, though. If someone is banging a wrench against an alternator while muttering in a thick regional dialect, is it really fair to test a learner's listening skills on that? Honestly, if Cousin Jake is speaking my native language, I might still fail to understand what he's talking about.
Sure.
So why is this the gold standard for listening?
Because that frustration you just described is exactly the point the manual is trying to make.
Oh, really?
Yes. Navigating that level of ambiguity is the ultimate hallmark of a master listener. The objective is not to understand 100% of the vocabulary Cousin Jake uses.
Okay.
The objective is to train your brain not to panic when the audio degrades. It is about accepting the ambiguity, resisting the urge to experience a mental block, and using context clues to extract the overarching meaning anyway.
Yeah.
If you can watch Cousin Jake and walk away understanding the basic mechanics of what he did to that motor, your ear is incredibly resilient. And that resilience prepares you for the final stage, level 6.
Ah, yes, level 6. The manual calls this eavesdropping, or listening to recorded, unscripted conversations in busy public places. Picture trying to track a conversation between two people sitting at table over in a loud, echoing cafeteria.
Oh.
Right. They are constantly interrupting each other. They're using highly localized slang. They're dropping half their syllables. And there's the clatter of plates and 50 other conversations happening simultaneously. The text posits that if you can accurately track the topic and tone of that conversation, you have achieved absolute auditory mastery.
It is the ultimate real-world test. You are given zero visual input from the speakers themselves, you're subjected to maximum environmental distraction, and you are forced to process unfiltered, highly elided, authentic speech.
So, if eavesdropping in a noisy cafeteria and deciphering Cousin Jake's ATV repairs represent the absolute peak of auditory difficulty, what is a more accessible, perhaps more enjoyable way to train the ear to these authentic natural rhythms?
Well, the manual offers a solution that I found deeply compelling and honestly surprisingly beautiful.
Yeah.
It suggests that the ultimate training ground for listening is music.
It is a brilliant pedagogical pivot. Music is, of course, universally relatable, but on a structural level, it is a phenomenal mechanism for teaching the mechanics of listening.
Right.
The manual dedicates significant time to explaining the rhythm connection. It points out that the standard 4/4 time rhythm, the foundational beat of almost all rock, pop, and country music, directly mirrors the natural stressed and unstressed rhythm of spoken English.
It matches perfectly.
Exactly. English is what linguists call a stress times language, meaning the time between stressed syllables remains relatively constant, regardless of how many unstressed syllables are crammed in between them. When you sing along to a song, the musical beat physically forces your brain and your mouth to experience those correct intonation patterns in a way that reading a dry dialogue from a textbook never could.
It's basically an emotional Trojan horse.
Yes.
You think you're just, tapping your foot on the steering wheel during your morning commute, but your brain is actually passively absorbing deeply complex grammar structures and cultural values. The manual provides a whole playlist of examples demonstrating how high-level grammar is hidden in plain sight within pop culture.
The examples they chose are fantastic. They use the Beatles' classic Yesterday to deeply embed the simple past tense. They point to Stevie Nicks and Fleetwood Mac's Landslide to explore the complex timing implications of verbs as we age.
Yeah.
But one of the most structurally complex examples is Beyoncé's If I Were a Boy, which the manual highlights as a masterclass in the unreal conditional.
Let's define that for the listener, because unreal conditional sounds like a high-level math theorem. What does that actually mean in the context of the song?
Sure. So the unreal conditional is a grammatical structure we use to talk about a hypothetical situation that is fundamentally contrary to current reality. The title itself sets the condition. If I were a boy,
Right.
she is not a boy. Therefore, every single action and consequence described in the rest of the song is a hypothetical projection of an alternate reality. It requires the listener to hold two realities in their head at once, the truth and the hypothetical.
That's fascinating.
And pop music also excels at the present perfect tense, connecting past actions to present states. The manual cites U2's I Still Haven't Found What I'm Looking For, or classic Queen tracks, as perfect grammatical constructions married to melodies that get stuck in your head for days.
And, the analysis goes so much deeper than just verb tenses. The manual shows how we can unearth high-level literary devices within top 40 pop music.
Like what?
They use the band Maroon 5 to teach idioms and extended metaphor. For example, in the song Misery, the lyrics use the phrase, getting you back, The text points out a crucial listening distinction here in many contexts. Getting someone back means winning their romantic affection again.
Right.
But in the context of this specific song, it means retaliation. You hurt me, now I'm going to get you back.
Oh, wow, that completely flips the meaning.
Exactly. And in their song, She Will Be Loved, the manual unpacks the metaphor of the broken smile. It challenges the listener to realize that a smile cannot literally be broken. It is a metaphor for a woman who has been deeply damaged by her life experiences, but continues to put on a brave, outward-facing performance.
The storytelling aspect of music is just incredibly rich for active listening. They highlight Kenny Rogers' country classic, The Gambler. This isn't just a song about playing poker on a train. It is a sustained, extended metaphor comparing the strategy of a card game to the strategy of navigating life's critical choices, knowing when to hold on and knowing when to walk away.
Right.
They also reference the band Fun, specifically their song Some Nights, which on the surface is a catchy pop anthem, but actually explores profound existential disillusionment with both the hollow lies of war and the fleeting cons of young love. These are not trivial themes. They are incredibly deep, complex human experiences packaged within accessible, popular melodies.
I think my absolute favorite example from this entire section of the text is how they analyze Macklemore's massive hit Thrift Shop.
Oh, I loved this part.
On the surface, if you just listen to the hook, it's this funny, highly colloquial, slightly ridiculous song about buying used clothes wearing your grandparents' cast-offs.
Right.
But the manual points out that if you actively listen to the verses, it actually carries a serious, biting, underlying sociological message about modern economics. It is a sharp critique of a consumer culture that repeatedly fails to live within its means, mocking people who obsess over buying $50 designer t-shirts when they only have $20 to their name.
Which brings us to what is undeniably the most fascinating and perhaps provocative analysis in this section of the text. The manual delves into a very specific sociological trope that appears repeatedly across decades of pop music.
Yes.
They identify it as the trope of the beautiful woman who doesn't know she's beautiful. They cite a lineage of songs ranging from Sandy Kershaw's country hit She Don't Know She's Beautiful to Bruno Mars's Just the Way You Are, all the way to One Direction's global smash, What Makes You Beautiful.
Right. And I want to pause here and be very explicit with our listeners. The manual provides a highly specific sociological critique of this trope, and we are going to explore exactly what the text argues without taking a personal stance on it.
Absolutely.
We are simply reporting on the fascinating way this ESL instructional manual deconstructs a boy band anthem to teach critical listening.
Exactly. The text encourages the listener to ask a deeper question. Why is this such a prevalent recurring theme? Why is the explicitly clueless, beautiful woman positioned as the ultimate male fantasy in these lyrics?
It's a great question.
The manual suggests that in a patriarchal culture, a physically beautiful woman is historically treated as a high-value status symbol. However, a beautiful woman who possesses supreme self-awareness, who knows her exact worth, holds inherent power and agency.
Right.
Therefore, the text argues, a woman who is stunningly attractive but simultaneously plagued by profound insecurity and unaware of her own value, is viewed by the narrator as the ultimate jackpot.
Because, as the text analysis concludes, her lack of self-worth makes her far less likely to leave the relationship and much easier to manipulate or control.
Yeah.
The manual states that while on a superficial auditory level, these songs sound like sweeping romantic celebrations of a woman's natural beauty, active listening reveals that they actually reinforce deep inequalities and subtle control dynamics that are rife within a patriarchal culture.
It is a profound, almost jarring level of sociological and psychological analysis applied to a One Direction song. But the manual's broader pedagogical point is vital. Pop music is not trivial. It speaks volumes about the cultural water we are swimming in.
It really does.
Analyzing these songs forces a listener to move beyond simply translating vocabulary. It forces them to listen actively to the cultural subtext, the power dynamics, and the unspoken societal values woven beneath the lyrics.
It really makes you step back and ask, are we dismissing pop culture entirely too easily when we label it as trivial bubblegum? If you can critically dissect a Bruno Mars track to understand systemic cultural power dynamics, that is the absolute pinnacle of high-level listening. But, as the manual rightly notes, analyzing music in your car is great for passive absorption. To really build the neurological muscle of listening, you have to gamify the process in real time.
You have to make it a game.
Yes, you have to force the brain to process difficult oral information under pressure, interacting with other humans.
The manual transitions here into an entire section dedicated to highly interactive classroom games designed to do exactly this. And the underlying psychology of why these games work is rooted in a concept educators call lowering the affective filter.
It's a great term.
Right. To put it simply, when you are in a formal learning environment or a high-stakes meeting, your anxiety is high. Your brain is hyperfixated on the fear of making a mistake, looking foolish, or failing to understand perfectly. This anxiety acts as a literal filter that blocks incoming linguistic data.
It just shuts the door.
Exactly. But when you introduce a game, the stakes instantly shift. The environment feels lower risk. You become so caught up in the mechanics of the play, the competition, or the absurdity of the task that you forget to be anxious. The affective filter drops, which forces your brain into immediate, real-time auditory processing without the paralyzing grip of perfectionism.
Let's talk about the mechanics of some of these games, because they sound incredibly chaotic, entirely undignified, and deeply effective.
Yeah, let's hear them.
The first one they mention is a classic most of us played in childhood. Telephone, sometimes called Chinese whispers. You whisper a complex phrase into the ear of the person next to you, and it travels down a line of 20 people. By the time the last person speaks it aloud, it has morphed into something completely unrecognizable and absurd.
I used to love that game.
Right. But the text points out that this isn't just a funny icebreaker. It visually and orally highlights exactly how easily human communication breaks down, and how the act of whispering forces the listener to tune out the environment and listen with extreme surgical focus.
Then there's a game called Running Stories, which sounds like a phenomenally effective way to induce absolute pandemonium in a classroom.
Oh, this one is great.
The text describes dividing the room into two competing teams. Half of the team remains seated at their desks, and they are given a piece of text that is completely jumbled and out of order. The other half of the team stands at a whiteboard on the far opposite side of the room.
Okay.
The seated students have to read and mentally untangle the story, then physically run across the room and shout the corrected sentences to their teammates, who must write them on the board exactly as dictated, all while the other team is doing the exact same thing simultaneously.
I love the absolute chaos of that.
Right.
The text notes that it is incredibly loud. It shatters the physical monotony of sitting in a chair, and it hones both speaking and listening skills in a totally organic, high-pressure environment. You can't tune out when your teammate is shouting a sentence at you over the din of a dozen other voices. Another tactic they use is memory games, the classic road trip game like, I'm going to grandma's house and I'm bringing apples, a bear, carrots, and a dragon. Each person adds an item alphabetically, but you have to actively listen to, remember, and correctly repeat the entire ever-growing list before adding your own.
They also utilize a brilliant exercise called visual dictation. Two people are instructed to sit back to back so they cannot see each other's faces or hands. One person is given a visual image, maybe a complex grid of celebrity faces, or a random assortment of geometric shapes like overlapping hearts, stars, and triangles.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You have to describe the spatial arrangement of this image to their partner using only their voice. The partner, who is holding a blank piece of paper, has to draw or arrange the grid, perfectly based purely on those oral instructions.
Wow.
Because there are no visual cues, no pointing, no eye contact, it forces an incredible level of precision in both the speaker's descriptive language and the listener's spatial comprehension.
And for raw, granular phonetics, they employ a stand-up, sit-down game specifically for vowel discrimination.
Okay, how does that work?
The teacher reads a continuous script aloud. Every single time the students hear a specific target sound, for example, the short A sound in cat, they have to instantly stand up and then sit back down. Or they modify it with colored cards. The students hold up a red card the moment they hear the bat sound and a blue card the moment they hear the bay sound.
That sounds exhausting but effective.
The mechanics of this are vital. By attaching a physical kinesthetic reaction to a specific auditory stimulus, it serves as a powerful neural reinforcer. You aren't just passively receiving the vowel sound, your entire central nervous system is reacting to it. It burns the phonetic distinction into the brain far faster than simply reading it on a chart.
So thinking about how to translate this for you, the listener, who isn't currently enrolled in an ESL class, realistically, we are probably not going to organize a game of running stories at our corporate office jobs, and we definitely shouldn't be holding up red and blue cards during a somber quarterly earnings call.
Probably not a good career move.
Probably not. But what if we took the underlying psychology of this and gamified our own boring high-stakes environments? What if you and a trusted coworker agreed on a secret phrase before walking into a painfully long seminar, and you actively listened to see if the speaker ever accidentally assembled those words?
Oh, that's clever.
Or what if you mentally tracked and tallied exactly how many times a specific manager uses a particular filler word or a specific corporate buzzword? You are essentially tricking your amygdala. You are imposing a game-like structure onto a mundane environment to maintain your focus and train your ear to actively hunt for structural cues.
That is an incredibly astute extrapolation of the text. By internally gamifying a sterile listening environment, you prevent the cognitive fatigue and the mental block we discussed earlier. You give your brain a specific mission which forces it to stay engaged with the audio stream.
It gives you a reason to listen.
Exactly. And this concept of adapting classroom tactics to adult environments brings us perfectly to the final and perhaps most impactful phase of the manual's methodology. How to take all of these disparate skills and apply them to the real, high-stakes reality of adult life.
Yes, the manual culminates by moving away from games and transitioning into what we can call real-world superpowers. It explores how to systematically apply active listening to employment, healthcare, and just daily survival. And surprisingly, the very first thing it places a massive foundational emphasis on is something that our culture usually brushes off as completely trivial: small talk.
We have a tendency to deeply dismiss small talk. We view the idle chatter around the office water cooler or the comments about the weather in the elevator as meaningless, inefficient filler.
Right, it feels like a waste of time.
But the manual posits that from a linguistic and sociological standpoint, small talk has massive ramifications. Being able to successfully engage in small talk proves to the other person that you possess natural language reflexes, that you can unconsciously track the conversational rhythms of others, and that you can formulate and deliver appropriate low-stakes responses.
It builds trust.
It is the absolute foundation of building social capital in any workplace. If you cannot navigate the unwritten rules of small talk, you will inherently struggle to build the trust and rapport necessary to execute larger, more complex professional initiatives.
The manual actually suggests actively practicing these micro-interactions in low-stakes public environments, and it specifically mentions utilizing grocery store checkout lines. It argues that cashiers are a captive audience accustomed to rote small talk, making it a safe, predictable space to practice natural language interactions.
That makes sense.
But I have to ask a highly practical, slightly awkward question on behalf of our listener. How do you actually practice active listening on a cashier without becoming the creepy, overly intense person holding up the line for everyone else?
It's a very fair question. What's fascinating here is that the manual's guidance implies that success relies entirely on reading the context and respecting boundaries. The goal is not to force a stranger into a deep philosophical dialogue.
Right.
You manage the interaction by providing immediate context, perhaps lightly mentioning with a smile, "I'm practicing my active listening today, trying to be more present." Or, more simply, sticking strictly to benign, shared observations. You comment on the weather or a specific item on the belt.
Keep it light.
Keep it very light. The critical pivot, however, is what happens next. The goal is to ask a brief, open question and then actually listen to their response. Most people treat small talk as simply waiting for their turn to speak again. Active listening means you absorb their brief answer, acknowledge it authentically, and let the interaction naturally conclude.
It's about building linguistic reflexes in a safe environment. And those fast-twitch reflexes are absolutely crucial when you step into genuinely high-stakes environments like aggressive networking events or make-or-break job interviews.
Oh, absolutely.
The text specifically advises listeners to aggressively practice processing the top 10 standard interview questions prompts like, "Tell me about a time you solved a conflict with a colleague and how you approached it," or "Walk me through how you prioritize tasks under extreme pressure."
And in the context of an interview, the absolute most critical listening skill you can deploy is the self-awareness to recognize when a miscommunication has occurred.
Which happens a lot.
All the time. The manual makes a very definitive statement here. If an interviewer asks a complex question and you do not fully understand it or you sense a disconnect in the phrasing, the strongest, most professional move you can make is to pause, apologize, and ask for explicit clarity. Could you rephrase how you define extreme pressure in this specific role?
That feels so counterintuitive because we are trained to project flawless competence in an interview. We think asking for help shows weakness.
But the text argues the exact opposite. Attempting to guess what the interviewer meant and proceeding to ramble off topic for 3 minutes to cover up your confusion is exponentially more damaging to your prospects than taking 5 seconds to ensure you have accurately processed their prompt.
It shows you actually care about getting it right.
Asking for clarity demonstrates active engagement and a commitment to accuracy traits every employer desperately wants.
Beyond the boardroom, the text lists every day real-life administrative tasks as the ultimate unforgiving tests of a master listener. Imagine sitting in a busy medical clinic, listening to a doctor rapidly list your symptoms and having to accurately fill out complex medical forms based solely on that frantic conversation.
That's incredibly stressful.
Or making a phone call to a loud auto garage to schedule highly specific repairs to an alternator based on what a mechanic is shouting over the noise of an air compressor. Or sitting in a sprawling 2-hour college lecture and attempting to take accurate synthesized notes while the professor speaks in one continuous droning paragraph. These aren't just language tests designed for an ESL student. These are fundamental tests of navigating adult life.
And to survive all of those scenarios, you, the listener, must seamlessly employ the entire invisible architecture we discussed at the very beginning of this deep dive.
You have to use all the tools.
Exactly. When the doctor is speaking rapidly, you must listen for the stressed words to isolate the vital medical data. When the mechanic is shouting over the air compressor, you must navigate the reductions, the elision, and the intense background noise without experiencing a mental block. When the college professor is droning on, you must rely heavily on discourse markers.
Wait, discourse markers. That's another great piece of terminology. Let's define that before we wrap up. What exactly is a discourse marker?
Discourse markers are the structural signposts of verbal communication. They are words or phrases like, however, consequently, on the other hand, or firstly. They don't carry the core meaning of the sentence, but they tell the listener's brain exactly how to organize the incoming data. If a manager says, there are a few core issues I need to raise, that phrase is a discourse marker.
It's a signal.
Yes, it signals to the active listener to immediately open a mental file folder and prepare to track a numbered list. Recognizing these markers allows you to map out the architecture of someone's thoughts while they are still speaking.
Okay, we have covered an absolutely incredible amount of ground today, and we've pulled a wealth of insight from a manual that most people would never think to pick up. Let's summarize the journey we've taken. We started by completely shattering the illusion that listening is a passive biological function.
We established that it is a highly strategic, muscular, caloric activity.
We looked under the hood at the invisible architecture of speech. How decoding the subtle stress on a single modal verb, or recognizing how a rising pitch magically turns a statement into a question, can change the entire reality of a conversation.
We confronted our own fatal flaws as listeners, recognizing how translating in our heads creates a massive mental lag.
And how giving in to a mental block when the audio gets tough fundamentally sabotages our ability to comprehend the world.
We then explored the absolute necessity of escaping the curated, sanitized bubble of clear, slow speech. We learned that to truly master listening, we have to embrace the chaos. We have to seek out the background noise, the interrupted turn-taking, and the heavily accented, ungrammatical reality of YouTube videos in noisy cafeterias.
We took an amazing, slightly unexpected musical detour, discovering how we can use top 40 pop songs as emotional Trojan horses to absorb complex grammar structures like the unreal conditional, and how analyzing a boy band lyric can train our ears to hear the deep, unspoken sociological inequalities of a patriarchal culture.
We gamified the ear, using chaotic exercises like running stories and visual dictation to lower our anxiety and trick our brains into focusing.
And finally, we brought it all back to the real world, applying these mechanics to mastering the water cooler, surviving the grocery store checkout line, and dominating the high-stakes job interview. Listening takes immense, conscious, continuous effort.
If the listener takes absolutely nothing else away from this exploration, I hope you remember that applying just one or two of these techniques can drastically, tangibly alter the trajectory of your personal and professional relationships.
Really?
Simply making the active choice to ask for clarity instead of tuning out when a technical conversation gets overwhelming, or actively listening for the discourse markers people use to organize their anxieties fundamentally transforms you. You stop being a passive receiver of sound waves, and you become an engaged, dynamic partner in human communication.
So, as we wrap up our time together today, I want to leave you with a final, somewhat provocative thought to chew on as you go about your week. Society spends years and years and billions of dollars teaching us how to broadcast ourselves.
That is so
We
true.
take seminars on how to speak persuasively. We sit through workshops on how to write effectively and convincingly. We build debate teams. We join Toastmasters. We obsess over crafting the perfect social media post. We are culturally obsessed with projecting our own thoughts outward. But we rarely, if ever, take a single hour of instruction on how to actually listen.
We just arrogantly assume that because we have ears, it happens automatically.
But what if the next great leap in human connection isn't a new piece of social technology or an AI translation app? What if the next great leap is simply dedicating ourselves to the radical, exhausting, deeply active art of truly hearing each other? So the next time you find your brain out to lunch while you're nodding along to a conversation, remember the invisible mechanics. Step back onto the stairs, actively hunt for the stress, and engage. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the architecture of listening.